Week 8 of the NFL season is officially in the books, and after a pretty crazy set of games, I want to give you guys my 5 biggest losers of Week 8. Now, before we get into my top 5 biggest losers, I did want to throw out a couple honorable mentions. The honorable mentions that I'm going to throw out in this video are going to be the LA Rams, the Houston Texans, and the Cleveland Browns. But let us go ahead and hop into our top 5. At our number 5 spot, I have the Green Bay Packers. Now, I've talked about the Green Bay Packers multiple times this season. In fact, on my other channel, I actually talked about them before the season started, and I said this team would probably win about 8 to 9 games. And through the first couple weeks of the season, it looked like they were going to potentially be one of the better teams in the NFC. Jordan Love was looking good, and the players around him were rising to the occasion. But since the first 3 to 4 weeks, this offense has been absolutely anemic, and it starts off with the weapons around Jordan Love, and then it goes to Jordan Love. And this Packers team as a whole just has not been a very good team this year. They currently sit at 2-5, and they just suffered a loss to the Minnesota Vikings with a score of 24-10. Now, I didn't think they were going to win this game because ultimately the Vikings were coming off a couple good wins, and with Kirk Cousins being who Kirk Cousins is, I expected him to win this game. Side note, I hope Kirk Cousins gets healthy, and I think the Minnesota Vikings have a long future ahead of them. But back to the Packers, this was a game that I kind of felt like was a must-win game for you if you want to contend for a playoff spot. Now, ultimately, if you're the Packers, I think the playoffs are at this point kind of a long shot, and truth be told, I don't think that's anything surprising. I think this Green Bay Packers team, if you would have told them what their record would have been at the start of the season, I don't think they would be that surprised. Ultimately, this Packers team has a super young quarterback with a super young cast of supporting players, and unfortunately, a lot of these great players along the offensive line and defense have suffered some injuries. And unfortunately, everything that's gone wrong for this Packers team this year kind of was at a forefront in this game. Jordan Love didn't play good, the play calling was questionable, and because there's no consistent number 1 receiver on this team, Jordan Love is constantly trying to figure out who to throw the ball to. On the day, they only ran the ball 13 times, and while when they ran the ball, it wasn't very effective, you have to continue to establish a run game no matter if it's effective or not. You can't just sit there and abandon something because it's not quite working. I don't understand why Aaron Jones nor AJ Dillon are not getting at least 15 carries, especially when you have a younger quarterback. And in the passing game, like I said, there's not really a number 1 receiver. This week, it kind of appeared that Jayden Reed was his number 1 option, but he threw him the ball only 4 times. He threw Christian Watson the ball only 3 times, and then Dontavian Wicks only got the ball 2 times. I think this Packers team maybe needs to combine some of these receivers to maybe move on from 1 or 2 of them, because a trio of receivers of Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, and Jayden Reed is nice and all, but they're super young, and I don't personally think that any of those guys can really be that number 1 option for Jordan Love. I think if this Packers offense had a really talented, great quarterback like an Aaron Rodgers, I think he could make somebody of these 3 receivers really good. But I think because you're dealing with a super young quarterback who just doesn't have the rapport with these receivers, it's going to take a lot of time for them to actually become something. So if I was them, I would love an idea of trading one of these guys and maybe some draft capital to go out there and get a Mike Evans or a Devontae Adams, quote unquote. But I wouldn't do anything like that until after the season's done with. And in this game, it was just really rough for them. The season's over for Green Bay at this point. At this point, you're just trying to develop some of your younger guys. And I think you got to give Jordan Love a little bit more time and a little bit more leeway. I think you have basically the rest of the season to figure out what scheme you're going to run for the upcoming years and whether or not you can really trust Jordan Love to be the quarterback of the future. Let's move on to my 4th biggest loser, and is going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers. Guys, let's be 100% honest with one another. The Pittsburgh Steelers were the most fraudulent 4-2 team ever. The amount of lucky bounces, amount of lucky moves, lucky things that happened to the Steelers defense is ridiculous. Now, you got to give them some credit. They do have a couple really nice players, both offensively and defensively. George Pickens, TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, those guys are incredible. But it just felt like every single week they were having some crazy antic in the game go their way for them to win it. And in this game, they didn't really have that. The Jaguars basically just took care of business this week. The final score was 20-10, and the Pittsburgh Steelers now sit at 4-3. Unfortunately for the Steelers, you also lost your starting quarterback in Kenny Pickett. Now, I don't know the timeline for return for him, so for his sake, I do hope he does get healthy and better, because this team isn't going anywhere with Mitchell Trubisky as your quarterback. I think moving forward, if Mitch Trubisky is your quarterback for the next couple weeks, you have to establish a run game. I know Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren are probably one of the worst running back duos in the entire NFL, but I think you have to give at least one of them a chance to really have 15 or 20 carries, because at the bare minimum, you can give Mitchell Trubisky the open hand to throw a bunch of bombs to George Pickens. And in this game, it just kind of was an ugly offensive performance yet again. Somehow, some way, Matt Canada is still the offensive coordinator for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and I'm gonna be honest with you guys, and I think a lot of Steelers fans are gonna hate me for saying this, I don't think he's gonna get fired anytime soon. I'd be shocked if they honestly got rid of him this offseason, because ultimately Mike Tomlin is probably one of the most stubborn guys, and honestly rightfully so. He truly does believe in everything he does, and again, I don't really blame him. He has the track record to prove that. It's just one of those things where it's like you just kind of have to give up for him on this point. Next week, you face the Tennessee Titans, and I'm honestly kind of scared for the Steelers team, because Will Levis genuinely looked good last week, and if he can do that against this Steelers team, it's really going to expose them in so many different ways. And backtracking back to this Jaguars game, this is a must-win game for the Steelers in my opinion, because ultimately if you wanted to win the AFC North or at least make a wild card spot, you had to stay in front of teams like the Bengals and potentially the Ravens. But now with the Bengals Bengals suddenly looking good, and with the Ravens potentially being a top 3 team in the NFL, you stand no chance of winning this division, nor honestly probably making the playoffs. The only chance they really have to do that is if they can somehow just continue to win and pick off W's, but I don't think their lucky streak is going to continue. At the number 3 spot, I have the Kansas City Chiefs. I never thought in a million years that I'd be saying that Kansas City Chiefs in one of these videos, because ultimately they are the token of success in the NFL, and this was such a bizarre game for the Chiefs. For starters, you lost to the Denver Broncos by 15 points, and this is a Chiefs team that hasn't lost to this Denver Broncos team in like 8 years. So coming into this week, I thought it'd be more competitive than it usually is, given the fact that Patrick Mahomes had some stuff going on before the game, but I never thought they would actually lose. But Lord and behold, it happened. And it was such an ugly game for the Kansas City Chiefs. Patrick Mahomes threw 2 interceptions, they had 3 fumble loss, so they combined for 5 turnovers this week, against arguably the worst defense in the entire NFL. And this was a game where the Kansas City Chiefs defense didn't really do that bad. They held Russell Wilson to 12 of 19 passing for only 114 yards. Granted, they gave up 3 touchdowns, but you get kind of my point. And they did a good job of holding their running game, with Javonte Williams having 27 carries for 85 yards. It wasn't really like they were getting destroyed, but the fact that they were still competitive in this game despite having 5 turnovers is just kind of crazy. Let's be honest about this Chiefs team. This team has some legitimate problems, because as great as Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and Andy Reid are, they don't have any other receiving weapons outside of those guys. And based off how it's looking in the trade deadline right now, it doesn't really appear that the Chiefs would go out there and make a splash trade for a receiver. If I was Kansas City, I would go out there and try to call for a Jerry Jeudy or a Courtland Sutton, but I kind of understand why they wouldn't want to do that. But if you look at this receiving core for the Kansas City Chiefs, it's pretty poor. And at times I kind of feel bad for Patrick Mahomes, because he's making the right plays. It just kind of doesn't go his way sometimes. And don't look now, but Patrick Mahomes has actually thrown 8 interceptions this year, which is close to league high. And this Kansas City Chiefs is 6-2. That being said, they're still in the front running to win the championship this year. Yes, I have my concerns for this roster, but it's still Andy Reid, Travis Kelce, and Patrick Mahomes. Not to mention with Taylor Swift in the stands, the NFL refs just love this Kansas City Chiefs team, so they're going to win off the refs a couple weeks. So that being said, my concern level isn't too high, but you kind of get my point. My second biggest loser of the week is going to be the Las Vegas Raiders. And boy oh boy, I have a lot of bad things to say about this Raiders team. Coming from a Raiders fan, I can tell you without a doubt in my mind, the Raiders are maybe the most directionless team in the entire NFL. The fact that I wake up this morning and hear the fact that we're not going to trade Davante Adams nor Josh Jacobs because we think we can still compete for a playoff spot is atrocious in my opinion. I don't know what happened in this Detroit Lions game that makes you think that we can still contend for a playoff spot, because it was one of the ugliest games I've ever seen from this team. Jimmy Garoppolo sucks. I understand he had some injuries coming into this week and he actually had to go to the emergency room at one point, so I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt, but the amount of times he missed a wide open Davante Adams was truly atrocious. Do you guys want to know who was our leading receiver this game? It was Josh Jacobs. And do you want to know how many yards Josh Jacobs had? 27. Do you want to know how many catches he had? 2. What about your number 1 receiver who gets paid a bajillion amount of dollars? 1 catch for 11 yards. And had Jimmy Garoppolo just hit him on some stupid easy throws, he would have probably had over 4 catches for over 100 yards and multiple touchdowns. The only positive I can honestly give you about this game is that Josh Jacobs was great, but honestly, I don't care about that. I don't understand why this Raiders team does not go on a fire sale. Trade Josh Jacobs. Trade Hunter Renfrow. Trade Jacoby Myers, trade Davante Adams, trade some of his defensive pieces. It's not working. And while you're there, fire Josh McDaniels and hire somebody who's competent. We made it to the playoffs just 2 years ago with an interim head coach, and we replaced him with the bozo that is Josh McDaniels. And everything that he has done to this franchise has turned us back another 5 years. This is not a horrible roster. There's stars at almost every other position. The problem is the schemes are trash, and there's just not a very well put together roster. You have the stars, now complement them with decent players, and give them a proper scheme and a good head coach who knows how to manage a game properly. My only sanity left for this team is the fact that we can fire Josh McDaniels and go out there and hire a guy like Ben Johnson, because it truly does baffle me that this Raiders team is continuing to do this every single year. Sorry for my little rant. Let's actually move on to our number 1 biggest loser, and fortunately it's not my LV Raiders. It's actually going to be the San Francisco 49ers again. If you would have told me after the Dallas Cowboys game that the San Francisco 49ers would have lost 3 straight in a row, I would have told you that you were mad, because they looked like the best team in the NFL by a mile against the Dallas Cowboys. They ran the ball down their throat, they passed the ball down their throat, they smoked them, and they made them quit halfway through the game. And since that game, they have a 19-17 loss to the Browns with PJ Walker as a starting quarterback, a 22-17 loss to the Minnesota Vikings, and a 31-17 loss to the Bengals. I get it, Deebo Samuel, Trent Williams have had their fair share of injuries, but if Deebo Samuel and Trent Williams are the only reason why you're winning games, that's kind of crazy. And Brock Purdy has looked very human these past couple weeks. In fact, he's looked worse than human. He's looked bad. He's thrown multiple interceptions in every single week, and he's been kind of inaccurate at times. And heading into this week, they actually were going up against a Bengals team that was starting to figure out some of their problems. And this Bengals team put together their best performance of the year. Joe Burrow killed them all night long, and Joe Mixon was able to do some nice things against this 49ers defense. Truth be told, I'm starting to get a little concerned for this 49ers defense because, like I said, ever since that Dallas Cowboys game, they've looked very problematic. Their secondary hasn't looked as good. Their pass rush is not as good as it was last year, and they've been losing these games pretty handily. Sure, they could have won the Browns game and they missed a game-winning field goal, but you get my point. And this week for the 49ers, the trend continues of Christian McCaffrey getting a touchdown, but the trend continues of Christian McCaffrey not really being as explosive as he usually is. I do think that the McCaffrey problems are more of a fact that they're missing Deebo Samuel and Trent Williams, because those guys do open up the run game a lot. And I do think once those guys get back, this 49ers team will kind of get back to being who they usually are. But it's just baffling to me that they rely on those guys so much. Now, the good news for this 49ers team is that they were able to get George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk going this game. Both those guys had over 5 catches for over 100 yards. And at times, Brock Purdy looked great, but he also had 2 interceptions. My concern levels are slowly rising for this 49ers team. I'm not willing to throw them out of championship contention yet. Just because they're going through a bit of a skid right now, I definitely do think they're going to bounce back eventually. I think these next couple games for the 49ers are sort of must-win games because Dallas is going to be going up against Philadelphia this week. And either one of those teams is going to come out looking really good. If the Eagles win, then they're probably clearly the favorite for the NFC. And if Dallas wins, then Lord behold, the Dallas Cowboys are coming. And then all of a sudden, the 49ers are kind of looking kind of nervous. The trade deadline is today, and I think they should go all in on Jalen Johnson. I think at the bare minimum, he'll give them at least one corner who's decent, because right now their cornerback group is kind of weak. That being said, I don't really know if they have the cap space for a guy like him to retain him past this year, but you kind of get my point. There's a lot of questions for this 49ers team that needs to be answered. I think it starts off with Brock Purdy and figuring out what's going on with him, but I do have some faith they'll be able to figure it out. But for this week, they're my biggest loser. That is everything I have for you guys in today's video. You guys might have noticed this is actually my new channel. So if you guys are interested in seeing more of this type of content, make sure to like and subscribe because it helps me out an absolute ton, as well as share this video to all your friends and family who also enjoy NFL/NBA content. But I love you guys. Peace.